City Sounds, music, radio, podcasts.
In March this year, Payl 4 brought you the stories of 6 people whose lives were changed forever by war in Ukraine. They were not soldiers, activists, or politicians. They were civilians, people like you and I, unused to war or how to deal with it.
You will hear now the bomb again. You see this flash, and the sound will come like lately, so it means like, oh my god, it's not in the city. Oh my god. Crazy.
That was Marie, a model and dancer from Kyiv, who was in the city when Russian tanks rolled in. Marie fled to the Carpathian Mountains, while her mother stayed in the city as the Russians surrounded it. We haven't heard from either of them since. Then there was Jeff, a Belfast man who married his Ukrainian sweetheart and now lives in Kyiv.
It's like living in some dystopian war movie. You never actually thought that I would be standing in the centre of a civilized, modern country, capital, listening to air raid sirens.
Last time we spoke with Jeff, he was rescuing cats and dogs that were abandoned as people fled.
Stray dog. Very nervous. With the collar on, it must have had an owner.
We heard from 2 women recording their experiences in the besieged frontline city of Kyiv. Marina, along with her 6-year-old son, Emil, had travelled from her home in Dublin to visit her mother when she was suddenly caught up in the war.
Oh my God. It can be you. It can be anybody. Like you're trying to get to the railway station and your car is hit on the way.
And Yulia. She was 9 months pregnant and ended up having a cesarean section in Kharkiv's main hospital as the bombs rained down.
They say that they need to do it fast because the situation is getting worse and the electricity may be turned over in the middle of surgery.
Then you may remember Alexandra, an English teacher whose parents were stuck in the besieged port of Mariupol. She lost contact with them as the Russians laid waste to the city.
When I was sleeping, I saw my parents. I hugged my mom and hugged my dad. I woke up crying, realizing that I have no idea what to do.
I was there too, in Ukraine from the start of the war, documenting the human exodus and the Russian attacks on northern Kyiv. And we just heard from some locals who've been just crouching down here because there's been a lot of gunfire, that they're Russian soldiers, that the Russians have taken over this airport, which is just on the outskirts of Kyiv. So what's happened to the people who recorded their innermost thoughts for us during those opening weeks? Did they escape? Did they stay behind? Did they and their families survive? Tonight, Payl 4 tries to trace them, to discover how their lives have changed in 4 months of war. We met them in the chaos of those opening days, when Russia attacked Ukraine from the north into Kyiv and from the east into Donbass on the 24th of February.
Hello.
Today, Alexandra Ahire, a private English tutor, is continuing the heartbreaking search for her parents lost in Mariupol. She's still teaching, but mainly online now, because most of her pupils have fled.
So today we will finish with you part of the test which we started last time. And also
She was in a spiral of despondency last time we spoke. She sat in her Kyiv apartment listening for bombs.
I can hear air defense nearby my house. I have learned how to recognize different sound of different bombing, sound of different techniques, machines. That's not normal skill. I never wanted it.
Alexandra still recalls the moment she lost touch with her mum and dad. It was the start of March. The home city of Mariupol is 500 miles south of the capital and was an early target for Putin's army. Positioned on the Black Sea coast, close to the Russian border, Mariupol was bombarded day and night. Alexandra was checking on her parents every day. Then, ominously, the lines went dead.
Last time when I heard my mom, she was talking from the basement. It was about half a minute, and she told me to be strong and not to worry about them. If they disappear, like for 1 or 2 days, there would be no connection. But that was before I understood that the bombing, that's not like just some central parts and so on, that just covering all over everything. Our city is full of like dead bodies. That is like a hell in the life.
Alexandra tried again and again, but couldn't get through. The last time we spoke with her, she feared the worst. We'll catch up with Alexandra later. What about Jeff Dowie, the man who, back in February, described living in a dystopian nightmare?
A city in fear, a country in fear. All you see in the street now is families, backpacks, bedrolls, a few possessions running from a metro station to try and hide in the underground.
I caught up with Jeff in early summer, after the Russian retreat from the suburbs of Kyiv, when the city was emerging from weeks of hibernation. He's still there, and it's a very different city now from the one he described 4 months ago.
When you see the young people at the cafes holding hands and all the flowers starting to bloom, it's really difficult to see that there's a war. There's nobody scared anymore. It's a weird situation in Kyiv. I know when you go 50 kilometres north or east or 100 kilometres east, you start to see the reality of the war.
The pets they rescued have been rehoused across Europe. Now, Jeff drives his wife, Tanya, around bombed-out buildings.
Which premises? Up?
She is an insurance appraiser, estimating the damage to commercial properties.
We had to go out to a large warehouse or series of warehouses beside our bit in Russia, which had been targeted by the Russian military and hit by about 7 missiles, totally destroying the food warehouses and supermarkets, and all sorts of food factories were being targeted by the Russian military, not just army installations. They seem to be attacking the civilian infrastructure. It's terrible.
So, what's happened to Marie Mahoun, the model and dancer who fled Chernihiv for the Carpathian Mountains? Since we last spoke with her, we've been trying to reach her, to no avail. Marie had never considered her city a strategic target, even though it's just 60 miles from the border with Belarus. But days after the war began, Russian tanks were rumbling through her district on their way to Kyiv. Most of Marie's neighbors fled. Marie stayed behind to document what was happening for social media.
You know, some of my friends say I'm brave, some friends say that I'm crazy, but I don't have a fear, I don't have a panic. I just wanted to show people what is going on, and from one side it's a reality, and from another side, like, what the hell, is this really happening?
She was out on the street recording her experiences for us. Then, this. A missile. Marie was one of several people who narrowly escaped with their lives. Nearby, a Chernihiv apartment block was struck, killing 46 civilians. Another missile attack injured her mother.
I'm just hiding right now, but it's just something crazy is happening. There is a lot of bombs, and it's just so scary. Yeah. That's what's happening right now, and it's scary. We need to stop that. Please, we need to stop that.
Just 48 hours after she escaped from the city, Chernihiv was surrounded by Russian troops. Her mother had insisted on staying behind. It was the 10th of March when Marie sent us her final dispatch.
I'm finally in safe place because 3 days we didn't have a light, we didn't have nothing. It's my first day when I finally eat some normal food. I haven't ate so many days, I haven't slept so many days, but I can't even sleep, I can't even think, I can't even eat because my mom isn't there. But I'm going to wait when this craziness more or less will end and I can come back.
We never heard from her again. Since that first program, I've been trying to make contact with Marie. It may take some time. Further east, through the forests and across the freezing plains, was Yulia Balashova in the besieged eastern city of Kyiv. You remember, she gave birth as the bombs were falling. The last time we spoke with her, she'd been sent to the hospital bomb shelter, clutching her newborn baby.
I'm in the basement right now and actually the whole hospital in the basement now because the fighting is very close to us, and the last thing we saw was the lightning in the windows, so it was extremely dangerous. And now here we're safe, and I'm surrounded with women with newborn babies, and the conditions are quite challenging, let's call it.
Now we've learned that Yulia decided to discharge herself from hospital and return to her hometown just outside the city, only to find it was already occupied by Russian soldiers. 4 months later, we managed to track her down.
We were lucky because we accidentally used the way where they didn't put checkpoint.
She and her family had organized a dangerous escape by using back roads to slip through the Russian lines.
We know our town and we used not very popular way to drive out of the town. But, the roads were destroyed and the weather was cold and rainy, so it was so muddy and dirty and huge holes. I thought that we won't get that because we have like very small car, but I don't know, maybe God helped us, but somehow we were so lucky to get out of there.
After days traveling west, they came to a small town on the Ukrainian-Slovakian border. They just needed to get to the other side, but there was a problem.
When we got to Ukrainian border, we arrived with my babies. We showed documents and they say that we can go. We are free, we can go, but without husband.
Her husband was ordered to stay in Ukraine. No males under 60 years old are allowed to leave in case they're needed to fight. Yulia faced an agonizing decision: stay with him or take her newborn baby to safety.
I cried so much when we were crossing the border, and I yelled that I gave birth in basement and they have right to take my husband with me. But they say, well, no, it's against the law.
Yulia arrived in the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius at the end of March and is now looked after by local people, along with her 4-month-old daughter, Juliana.
She feels more comfortable when she is somewhere near me.
So when she gets older, you will obviously have to tell her about an experience which will seem barely believable.
I'm not sure whether she believes how she appeared. I hear so many sad and tragic stories of other women whose children died. And I realized only here how lucky I am to get a live child.
While Yulia had reached safety, Marina Golodnichova was still inside the besieged city of Kyiv. You remember she'd gone there on holiday to visit her mother. Marina was born and raised in Kyiv and had emigrated to Dublin years ago. She'd travelled back there with her 6-year-old son Emil, arriving just 3 days before war broke out.
There are regular bombs, there are fights happening very, very close to us. So we're not going anywhere for the next couple of days at least. We are staying at home. We took some precautions, we put some stickers on the windows, so... Hey, Emil, are you okay?
Mama,
Конечно, дорогой. There you go. He's fine. He was a bit scared yesterday, asking a lot of questions on who's gonna win and why Russia is attacking us. I never thought my son will have to use 2 sound of bomb, or he's gonna start asking me if the war is over yet or not. That is pretty scary.
Marina finally found a car and drove herself, her mother, Emil, and 2 cats 730 miles across the entire breadth of Ukraine to the western border. Today, 12 weeks after she made that perilous journey, she's back home in Dublin and organising fundraising events for her homeland. But she can't forget that some of her close relatives are still in Kyiv.
My uncle, he's a photographer and videographer. He has figured out the schedule when the shelling starts. And he sets up his camera at night on a tripod and he just does photos. Amazing photos. Like, it looks beautiful if you didn't know what that was coming from the Russian side. They're still in the same apartment, living on the 6th floor. So it's a beautiful view, but obviously it's not the most safe place in the area. But somehow, like, my mom's apartment and their apartment's still standing, not even a window shattered.
Marina's mother is settling into Dublin life, but family relations have suffered in ways she never anticipated. Marina has relatives in Moscow. At the start of the war, she and her mother would call them daily, but that soon stopped.
My mom is shattered because her family in Moscow tells her it's Ukrainians who are bombing themselves.
And what does your mum say when she hears that? Presumably she tells them what she sees.
Sending them photo proofs, telling them it's your own brother who just stood in the queue to the post office and that queue got bombed a half an hour later after he left. They just don't believe it. It's unbelievable how well propaganda in Russia works, that you don't trust your own relatives. They tell you, guys, we pity you because you're fully brainwashed by America. And when we hear this, like, what can you do? What can you say?
Have you fallen out with relatives in Moscow over this?
Unfortunately, we have. The last time my mom spoke to my cousin, her niece, she said, by 9th of May, we're going to capture Kharkov.
That was the time I cried the whole day because I was so shocked to hear that. If your closest relatives, people that you spoke to pretty much every day, are saying these things to you, they don't believe you, they believe the propaganda.
Marie, the dancer and model from Chernihiv, is still proving difficult to find. Last we knew of her, she was trying to escape to the Carpathian Mountains. Well, still no answer. I'm worried about Marie and her mum. You'll recall that her mother had decided to stay in Chernihiv as it was being surrounded. Marie did send us a message saying that she herself had got out, but we never heard from her again. I'll keep trying.
The next text which we will have for today will be,
By the start of April, it had been 3 weeks since Alexandra had heard from her parents in Mariupol. She didn't know if they were dead or alive. All she had now were her memories.
My mom's name is Olga. She is not very tall. I always like to joke about that. And she has dark black, like really black, super black hair, very kind smile. And my mom has beautiful eyes, brown eyes. And I always liked when she smiled. It seemed like she had sparkles in her eyes. My father's name is Victor. I think his biggest victory is my mom, that's for sure. He always protected me from everything.
She's hungry for any news from the city, and the headlines in April were not encouraging. Thousands were hiding in cellars, scavenging for food, sometimes among corpses in bombed-out supermarkets. There were bodies on the streets. The civilian death toll was climbing every day.
I started to be crazy because on my laptop, I opened the map of the city. And each time, each new post about new bombing, I always checked the places where was the shelling, trying to find out how much was the possibility that my house could be already destroyed. The days were endless. Just when I was sleeping, I was happy because in my dreams I could see my mom. My mom smiling in the house, my father calling me to the yard. I was happy only during the sleeping.
Then, a glimmer of hope. A group of Alexandra's old school friends from Mariupol began to link up. They swapped snippets of information they'd gleaned from inside the besieged city.
We all tried to find our families, and each of us was crying when we heard any news from anyone. And we all tried to find parents and relatives of each other. In 2 weeks, I got information that my family was seen alive. Was seen alive by some neighbors, by some friends of friends, and so on. And then, that was one moment of some little happiness that they were alive, and then again 2 weeks of silence, 2 weeks of pain, of nightmares, of crying all the time.
Her parents and her elderly grandmother lived close to the now infamous Azov steelworks, where the last Ukrainian fighters were holed up. Attempts to create humanitarian corridors for civilians had repeatedly failed.
I tried to send messages, I tried to send SMS, any kind of scene, having a hope that maybe there would be some moment when it appears and they will be able to see it.
Alexandra's parents weren't lucky enough to get out of Mariupol in time, but many did. They joined 8 million others on the long journey to the west. I was on the road too, moving in the opposite direction towards the front line in the second week of the war. There were heartbreaking scenes. As soon as we get to these checkpoints, which are actually quite twitchy places to drive through, there are tailbacks of 15 to 20 miles of people desperately trying to get out of Ukraine, and they're carrying babies and animals and jerry cans full of petrol, and I've never seen a human exodus anything like this before. Also moving against the traffic was a young British man called Liam Livingston.
These people, they're waiting there for days. As we were driving along, there were loads of people that were on the sides. They had makeshift tents, gazebos, fires on the side of the road where they could cook food, heat up water.
Liam's Ukrainian wife, Lily, is a professional violinist. She was in Kyiv, desperately waiting to be rescued by him.
So this journey's not what I expected. It's not like it is on TV. It's quite heartbreaking. It's really tough to deal with, but I need to get to my wife and get her to safety because I can't leave her there.
The last time we spoke with Liam, he'd managed to locate Lily, but the moment was far from joyous.
Greeting each other had to come to a halt because they started to fight. We heard machine guns and gunshots, so we didn't get a chance to really embrace each other. We had to quickly leave the area, so unfortunately, our direction, we had to drive towards the gunshots and then done a U-turn at the nearest location, and then made our way west.
We managed to contact Liam, who described how he'd escaped along roads that were under Russian attack. He's now back in Southampton with his wife and mother-in-law, but is still traumatised by what he saw.
When I was driving into Ukraine, the queue was around 3 days to exit Ukraine, so we fully prepared. We had 3 days worth of food, supplies. I had duvets, beanbags, pillows. But actually, when we got to the border, we were only waiting, I think it was around 6 or 7 hours, and then we were out because the queue had died down by then. But yeah, I was relieved. I was very relieved as soon as we crossed the border. There was always that thing in the back of your mind, if they stop anyone trying to leave.
His mother-in-law has found British life difficult to adapt to and is eager to get home.
She messaged me privately and said, can I go back to Ukraine because her friend's starting to go back? And I said, it's still not safe. For me, it's only safe when commercial flights start to operate in the country again. That's when she can go back. And then sure enough, recently Kyiv was targeted again, so it was certainly the right decision. My wife Lily, she cries, at least a couple of times a week because she misses Ukraine. So it's really tough on them.
We were still trying to trace Marie, the young woman fleeing to the Carpathian Mountains. I know the journey would have been long and treacherous. Then, in mid-June, this.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, how are you?
Good, and you?
It turns out Marie had only made it as far as Kyiv. She spent most of March trying to find out what had happened to her mother, trapped inside Chernihiv, 90 miles away. There was no water or electricity. Russian forces were bombing civilian targets, hospitals, schools, a cinema, and just like in Mariupol, the telephone lines were down.
I think it's the worst ever feeling, like you don't know what is happening with your, the most closest person, and you can't reach this person, and you're just looking if your family is alive or not.
At the end of March, when Russian troops withdrew from the region, Marie received a call. It came from an unrecognized number.
I was like, okay, Turkish number, this is weird. And I heard the voice of my mom.
A stranger had let Marie's mother borrow his phone so that she could make contact with her daughter for the first time in weeks.
Many people, they didn't give the phones because they had a very limited power of the telephone, so they were trying to save for their family or friends, I don't know. So it was really hard to find who could share with you a phone and make a call.
In April, Marie was finally reunited with her mother. They're staying in Kyiv, but Marie regularly drives the 90 miles of cratered road to Chernihiv to repair the damage to her mum's apartment.
When
when I arrived and what I see, there was no windows, there was like a broken door. And I was like, oh my God, how much money I need to spend on that? I felt like I betrayed my city, like I wasn't there to help, to protect, not protect, like support. I felt like very bad in that moment for the city, for people, you know, like I didn't stay there.
Marie says she's left with next to nothing, just her beloved pet cat, which she carries with her everywhere. Alexandra, the teacher in Kyiv, has still heard nothing from her parents in Mariupol. There's been almost a month of silence. Then, on the 28th of April, there was a development.
I remember the day very clearly. It was the first day after Easter. That was early morning when at 8:30 I got a call. The number was coded, I could not see it. And then with a lot of break in the line, I could hear my mom's voice.
She didn't record the call, it all happened so fast. Alexandra was overcome to find her parents and her grandmother was still alive. But she did record them later.
Привет, мам. Алло. Меня слышно?
Her parents have lived through the worst horrors of this war. They're cooking scavenged food on bonfires, finding corpses on the streets. There are stray dogs carrying human body parts in their mouths. Things have improved, but Mariupol is now in Russian hands. Her parents are careful not to discuss anything relating to the war in case their calls are being monitored.
Алло, мам. Ты пропадаешь. Алло, пупуль, привет.
Her father still travels an hour a day to fetch fresh water. Her mother has lost her 2 front teeth, she thinks because she ate only bread and water for weeks on end. But in the phone calls, they're cautious.
We sleep with the windows open because there is no electricity and no chance to have the fan on.
It's good that you've got nets on the windows at least.
Well, yeah, this year we needed to change the net because it was covered with holes from hungry birds. But it was okay. I patched up the net. Yesterday, one hungry mosquito came through and had to be killed. Yes, it was buzzing in front of your dad's nose.
Alexandra says her mother is putting a brave face on things. There are occasional lorry loads of Russian bread and basic supplies, but 400,000 people have either fled the city or been killed. They are now cut off from the rest of Ukraine, and her grandmother has run out of medication for her dementia.
Grandma is in her own element, doing her own little thing. Yesterday, your dad gathered 2 bucket loads of cherries. We overworked yesterday. I can't feel my fingers, just over 1.5 buckets.
Ну да, в холодильник не поставишь ничего.
Well, yeah, you're doing a really great job in that regard.
Yeah, and so everything's fine. I was gathering the cherries. I will make liqueur, and I'm also going to make wine. When you come, you can have some cherry wine.
It's difficult to see how such a visit could really happen. For now, Mariupol is behind enemy lines.
I hope that maybe there will be some borders, will be some rules, but we would just go abroad to see our family.
So that would be you, Alexandra. That would be you going abroad, as you say, to visit your hometown, what just used to be 500 miles down the road in the same country.
Yes, that sounds like a nightmare, but we are in the same country, but at the same time we are in different worlds. And I will do my best to go to that world and to help my family. And if I'm able to take them away from that terrible place.
Dublin, it's sports day. Marina is still trying to adapt to normal life and to protect her 6-year-old son, Emil, from dwelling on events he witnessed in Kyiv.
Obviously, the Ukrainian flags are everywhere here in Dublin. He's got just literally birthday party when we came back to Dublin, and he was greeted by his school. But when I asked him, do you know why you've got so many presents? He's like, because it's my 6.5 birthday. I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. Because I don't want to tell him all this. Because you made it alive out of a very dangerous place. He speaks about it in a semi-casual way. When they play teleporting or something, he's like, oh, I just teleported to Kharkov, but it's too dangerous, so I'm back here. He knows it. He's a bit of a child of war.
She follows developments in Ukraine on social media and is horrified by the recent supermarket bombing in Kremenchuk and the indiscriminate attacks on Kyiv in mid-June. Still, just like many others, Marina hopes to return to Ukraine one day.
Everybody wants to go home. Nobody wants to stay here. Nobody wants to make a life here. Everybody say, I want to go home. But then when you talk to them a bit more, you realize what they actually mean, that they want to go home to 23rd of February, 2022. And that home doesn't exist anymore.
This File on 4 podcast was presented by Payl Kenyan and produced by Hayley Mortimer. It was a BBC long-form audio production for BBC Sounds, where you can find more radio, music and podcasts.